Most of Australia will know Waleed Aly as a host of The Project, Channel 10's evening news talk show. Despite having amassed such a broad audience throughout his work in the media, Waleed has said himself,
I have an audience of one.
Waleed is a man of excellence without a plan. He has excelled in academia, law, politics and journalism, but never fully committed himself to a career in any one. But Allah is the best of planners, and through His will, Waleed is where he is today.
Oh, thank God that's over.
A'udhu billahi shaitan rajim, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another Safi Bros podcast, where we give you episodes on success stories. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we are very blessed to have an amazing brother with us, none other than Waleed Aly. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Waleed Aly.
Alaikum salam.
We can talk all day about his amazing stuff that he's done. But inshallah, we're going to go through all of them. And
All of them?
We're going to go through as many as we can. and I think you have to watch this on fast pace because it's going to be a long episode.
Oh, you reckon? Well, it started when I won the bronze footballer at football clinic in prep. And that was probably the first award I ever won.
Serious?
Want to start with that?
Wow. How old were you then?
I was 6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Do you remember that?
There?
Yeah, it was a big moment for me.
Oh, wow.
It's the peak of my football career.
SubhanAllah. So tell us a bit about yourself. Born in Australia?
Yeah.
How many siblings?
Born in Australia, I have one brother who's 10 years older than me.
Inshallah.
And I'm actually the first in my family born in Australia because my brother was born in Egypt. Parents came out from Egypt. Interesting thing about my parents was they actually met here in Australia. They didn't meet in Egypt. And they got married, and then my mum fell pregnant with my brother Ahmed. And around that time, my parents had decided Australia's not going to work. We're going back to Egypt. This is the 60s, right?
Wow.
Like, some Jippo guy, and the White Australia policy is still in play, So he just found it really hard. And so mum goes home thinking that's it. And dad's here tying up loose ends. And then at some point, my dad called my mum and said, I've sorted it out. We've got a job. We're staying.
Wow.
And mum's back in, probably in Fayoum, where she's from in Egypt. And like, what do you mean?
Wow.
So she decided to stay there, have my brother there. And then came back to Australia. And then I was born 10 years later. So in every family there's a generation gap.
Yeah.
But in migrant families there's like a generation gap and a culture gap because the kids are born in a different country with a different culture and all this sort of stuff, right? So I had that. But then my brother was kind of the figure in the middle because he was kind of like my parent, but he wasn't. So he kind of played a role. To me, he was like the parent who did grow up in Melbourne
SubhanAllah.
and could teach me stuff about footy
SubhanAllah.
or cricket or whatever, and just school. And,
Wow.
we were in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. There weren't there was one other Egyptian family. I remember them. There was a Vietnamese family down the road. That was it.
Wow.
I don't know. My dad was a civil engineer as well. So he was, after a while, he was building houses and things. And eventually he built a house in Vermont, in the eastern suburbs, and we moved into it. I came along once the family was established there, whereas my brother would have a very different story because he would remember all the little bits and pieces.
Yeah, the change.
But what it meant was that there were just things I missed out on which I really regret. So, for example, my Arabic's terrible. But one of the reasons for that was that, whereas my brother he can speak Arabic, like, Masri, there's Arabic. And,
Zayak.
Yeah. كويس. كله تمام. زي ماما. That's it. But because he used to go to Egypt a lot when he was a kid and play with our cousins and stuff like that. But also my parents spoke Arabic at home with him. All that time later, I come along and Arabic's not spoken at home in the way it was for my brother. And so there's all these
10 years.
Yeah, it's amazing how much changes in 10 years. Like they're quite an established, and my mum was amazing in that way. Like she comes out to Australia. You imagine this Egyptian woman coming out to Australia with probably an arts degree from a university in Egypt or something. And she winds up teaching English and Australian history.
Oh, wow.
They're like the subjects that she teaches.
Wow.
So the family I sort of grew up in was quite a different one from the one that my brother did, just because of the position they were in.
Yes.
society.
It was still establishing them, but then you
Yeah,
came
by
with
the time I came
established
along,
subhanAllah,
yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
amazing.
amazing.
It's a
And
very
that's
different
change.
scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Allah, take us to your primary school days. So, again, you won that award, of course. We just heard about
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
yeah.
But,
The bronze footballer. Don't forget that one or belittle it. It's a good award. I think it means I was the third best footballer in the under sixes.
Did you want to be a footy player?
I loved footy, yeah, and cricket. Sport was always a big thing. My brother instilled that in me because the thing is, like, sport is always a way in communities, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, and like the eastern suburbs of Melbourne at that time, not very multicultural, starting to change a little bit, but not a huge amount. I basically had to be like the best footballer or the best cricketer in the playground at school, and that was my way.
For them to love you.
Yeah. You know, if people wanted to be on my team at lunchtime, then that was something, right? That was kind of a way in.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah.
SubhanAllah, other guests have said the same things. SubhanAllah, it's amazing when you're in a minority, you know you can shine by being the best at certain things, and people will treat you.
Yeah.
You know,
All of a sudden you become that. You're
okay.
You're right.
Yeah.
The differences are put aside now. You know. It's
Yeah,
SubhanAllah,
yeah,
it's
to some
amazing.
extent. I mean, they can resurface, but yeah, at times, yeah. So
Well, you got to make us win.
yeah. But also, that's where my brother was really handy because he was obviously really into sport and whatever, and he was learning these sports that my parents, my dad never played cricket or like. Don't play cricket's not at a very high standard in Egypt, right? There's not a lot of it going on. Same with the Aussie rules footy. There's not a lot of it in Cairo. But my brother kind of figured out a lot of this stuff, and then he's teaching me how to play these things. And he's 10 years older than me, so I'm in the backyard practicing against someone who's like 5 times my size. Wow. So when I went and played against a kid at school, I was like, this is easy, you know. Yeah. Until eventually everyone catches up and you're just actually not very good. But up until that point, it was very handy.
You're the best.
Yeah. So so that was all. Yeah, sport was a massive part of it. Apart from the, you know, there was racial stuff from time to time, but not all the time. And I knew I was kind of different, and I knew being a Muslim made me different, and that would show up around things like Christmas time or whatever, or you know, Eid or something like that. But by and large, you know, it was a pretty standard middle-class Australian upbringing, you know.
At that time, were your parents plugged into the community a lot?
They were definitely plugged into the Egyptian community. So, you know, Isama Masjid?
Yes.
So my dad built that.
Oh, wow.
So most of the houses I lived in up until maybe 10 years ago, my dad would have built.
Allah.
Yeah, that's just, you know.
Amazing.
Yeah, but anyway, so, you know, he built that mosque. We used to spend a lot of time at, you know, Heidelberg Mosque, you know, As-Siddiq. A lot of it was very Egyptian community, whereas the Muslim side of it, as in specifically as Muslims, like the Islamic side of it, really probably came via my brother. The community was always part of my life, but they were kind of different communities. And the YMA community and that Muslim community, Muslims of that age and lots of different ethnic backgrounds, that's a different thing to like an ethnic community, which is what I got with the Egyptian stuff. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. I think we all have had that where you plug into your community that's more inclined Lebanese, or then you realise they're two different things.
Oh, beautiful. So that's you as a young chap growing up.
Yeah.
When did you realise that you had the gift of academia?
It's probably more a culture. So like my house was always an education-focused house. I didn't grow up in a house where it was like, oh, I wonder if you'll go to uni. It was like, well, no, that's just a given. It's a question of what you're going to do and which uni. And so education was so important to my parents, really important. So much so that when I did anything that played up at school, my teachers would say, I'll tell your parents, because they knew they'd be on the teacher's side. They wouldn't be on my side. And because I was so young in my family, I just grew up at dinner tables where people were constantly having debates about things that were beyond my understanding. But, you know, when that happens, eventually you kind of, something gets in.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
even if you don't really understand what's going on.
100%.
Even now, I can't think of any examples, but I know this phenomenon where something will drop and I go, that's what they were talking about like 30 years ago. That's what that argument was about or whatever. And so there was always debate and argument going on in our house, not in a sort of heated way, like it wasn't at each other's throats, but that was just the world
and I think
grew up
when
in.
education kicks in, it's the deeper discussions, really. That's what you're trying to say. So the deeper discussion, they got more intellect in them. So really, somebody at a younger stage has to really step up. Really to be able to absorb it. And if you don't, you still say, well, I tried, you know, subconscious, you know.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, you know.
Did you ever feel like it's not what you wanted? Did you ever feel like, you know, mum, dad, I know education's for you, but because we get a lot of people in our retreat that, you know, sometimes like mum and dad wanted you to be a doctor. They, like you said, you know, ground roots, they you know, want to push education, but some of them don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that?
No, so
It was the opposite.
There might have been things they would rather I'd done that I didn't want to do that specific thing.
Okay.
But not the overall
Doctor
thing. Well, I'm Egyptian, so if you're not a doctor or an engineer, you're basically not Egyptian. Like I think they might actually take your citizenship back. Is that a rule? I think it might be a rule. Yeah, maybe a pharmacist. Like if you have to,
that's terrible. That's terrible.
To be something. Definitely not a lawyer. This is actually the Egyptians don't rate lawyers. Certainly not in Egypt, because I think they see lawyers as like basically being agents of the government or something.
Yes.
Which is a very different situation to here. And so there's a bit of like, if I go to Egypt and I say I do a law degree, they're not. But if I say I did an engineering degree, it's Bash Mohandas. Totally everything. But no, education was like, and I always was like pretty good at school, like all the way through. I had one or two moments where I was battling, just because, you know, there was a step up in the how difficult the work was or whatever, and I didn't quite make it, and I had to adjust. So I had those sort of moments, but I never had a thing where I was like, education's stupid, I'm not interested. That was just always part of it. I mean, I grew up in the kind of house where I would come home from school and tell my dad I got 96% on a maths test, and he would say, what happened to the other 4%? You know, once I got through school and then through uni, and you know, I still was always the one in the family who did the things you weren't really meant to do. So this is jumping way ahead, but like I ended up working in media. My dad, I don't think he processed that. I think he was kind of like, well, it's not a proper job. So when are you going to do the proper thing? Like I left uni and I was a lawyer for a bit. And I think he was happy with that because he'd got his head around the idea that law was a job, like a proper job. But when I left law and moved into academia and then started doing media, he was just like, I mean, this is fun and games, but this isn't.
That's a wild change, really.
Yeah,
for them.
yeah. For him, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, because I think it's that migrant mindset, right, where you're worried, which I totally respect, you know, like you're worried about migration's an insecure thing to experience.
That's right.
So what you want is
security.
And media doesn't feel secure. It feels like it's gone like that, you know. You wake up one morning and suddenly it's over, that sort of thing. So I remember my dad, he passed away in 2014. And so that was 2 years before I won the Gold Logie, right?
Allah.
And I remember sitting there thinking, what would Dad say now? And it came to me in a flash. I said, I know what he'd say. He'd say, congratulations, Waleed, you've done quite well. Now go and finish your PhD. That would have been, I think that would have been his reaction. So he always had that. And my brother was a doctor, right? So he did it properly. You go to uni.
Yeah, your brother followed the whole
pathway.
pathway.
You do a real job. You work hard within that job.
Yeah.
He becomes a surgeon. So he's the good one, and I'm like the one who's sort of just
the black sheep of the family.
Yeah.
There's always one, they say.
Yeah, and I think my brother sees me a bit that way. Like my brother's one of the most important people in my life and a huge influence
amazing
on me.
brother, mashallah.
Yeah,
We've had him at the retreat, mashallah.
Yeah,
he's one of the speakers.
amazing. But he will often make some kind of remark about how I'm just the one who seems to do things that you're not meant to do and it works out. Whereas he's the one who does what you're meant to do and then gets frustrated that it's more difficult than it's meant to be.
To be honest, I called him a few times. He hasn't answered me. I really wanted to get some dirt on you. But
I know.
He didn't answer. I know he'll have everything on you.
That's the good thing about a brother who has a real job.
He doesn't answer.
You can't get him.
Allah protect him.
Mashallah.
Yeah, but no. I was at Vermont primary and then Vermont secondary. up until year 11. But year 11, I went to Wesley
Wow.
for 2 years. But I only went. My dad had been desperate to get me there for years, and
Why?
I always refused.
Why?
Because he just thought it was a great school, and because Dad, well, both my parents, but because Dad valued education so much, he would sacrifice anything to put me in the best educational position. That was his thing. And so for him, it was like, this is a great school. He enrolled me in year 7. I just refused to go. He enrolled me in year 9. I just refused to go.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually in year 11, I gave up and I went. But, I wanted to be with my mates.
Yeah, that's the thing, yeah.
In year 11, it's like, well, now it's VCE. So for those outside Victoria, that's the high school.
Serious time.
Yeah, the equivalent of HSC or I guess GCSEs or something. Anyway, I could do VCE or Wesley was offering the IB, the International Baccalaureate. It was like a global certificate or whatever. And it was a better program. And I eventually accepted that and then went.
The IB,
But it was like, it was a big moment because that was the moment where the educational argument became just overwhelming. And I succumbed to my dad's vision. It often gets talked about that I went to a private school, but it was literally only 2 years. They were an enormous 2 years, obviously, but everything else before that was just state schools.
Do you believe we would still have the Waleed Aly that we have today if you didn't?
If I didn't go? Probably not, actually. Or maybe a different version.
Yeah. Going through your high school time and all that, like identity as a Muslim, did that play in any way for you?
Especially at Wesley,
did that something like stand out? Like, would have been many Muslims at Wesley for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, there weren't many in Glenwave. There was quite a growing Asian community, but it was more sort of like East Asian, Chinese or there's a lot more Chinese there now than there were, but like it's that part of Asia, not like India, Pakistan.
Yes.
Certainly not Middle East. There were maybe one or two other Muslims, but that's about it. But I was kind of used to that. Everywhere I went, that was the situation. So when I played cricket, I was the only guy with a name that no one could figure out how to say. Even though I think Waleed's not that hard, but
not as hard as Ahmed. Like,
well,
you I went to St. Joe's in North Melbourne, so year 11 and 12 was similar sort of circumstance we had. I went to St. Joe's, North Melbourne, year 11 and 12, which is a completely different culture crash for me comparative to Faulkner High.
Yes,
you know what I mean. Yes. So, but subhanallah, it's a different dynamics. You're sort of the caliber of people are different. I noticed the thinking is different. The teachers are different.
The culture of the school.
The culture's so different.
Like I have only good things to say about Vermont primary and secondary. I had great times there and they were really good schools. But the big thing I noticed was when I went to Wesley was that was a place where they just expected, they put in you the idea that, well, of course you could do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So they go, our former students are Robert Menzies or Harold Holt. I mean, didn't end well for Harold Holt, but, or at that time, Michael Klim was a Wesley student. Mark Philippoussis was a Wesley student. So the thing about it is when I think about Vermont secondary, there are a couple of guys there who was really good at basketball, for example. They played for the Boomers in the Olympics. So it's not like it didn't produce people, but I guess the thing that private schools do, especially those old ones that do really well, is they're great at talking about themselves and talking about and so it just, I think, puts in the students this sense that, well, why not? So I literally went to school with people who just said, oh yeah, I'm going to be the Prime Minister of Australia, which is never anything I wanted to do. But the fact I would never have run into that, I think, at Vermont. Anyone who said that, it would be just like, what are you so arrogant? Like that's the way it would have worked. So it was a
belief in yourself.
Yeah, this
is
is
most important.
I think that's what it is. I think you saying that now sort of helps me reflect on my journey. Is that there's a lot more people at private school that believe in themselves purely because they're, like you said, the culture there has a lot of belief in itself. So you can't help but
you take it on.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is money. Like people who are used to being in situations where they do have some form of power, even if it's economic or whatever, but not all of it is. Some of it is just cultural in that way. So, that was the kind of school environment I was in, but I was always a minority. But the fact that I was a Muslim was always, it was never anything I hid. Everyone kind of knew it. the number of conversations I had as a kid in primary school, and it was like, okay, so you know how you're Christian? Well, I'm not. Like that's how it would start, you know, and it would come up. Yeah, like, you know, RE, like religious education, and I wouldn't be in the classroom or whatever. And so it would trigger these sorts of conversations. Yeah. There were sort of moments, you know, praying at school and stuff like that. You know, I guess that's where the Islam stuff becomes really central. I remember one time I was praying in like, I don't know, one of the storerooms or something, and a teacher just walked in on me, and it's a shame I can't remember this. I don't know whether I'd just done this or I'd got approval. So I don't know if I was meant to be there or not, which is quite an important detail.
One of those grey moments.
Yeah. But, you know, so there were moments like that.
Yeah.
You know, Ramadan, obviously, so fasting at school as I got older and things like that.
I know that feeling. I got caught with my foot in the bloody...
sink.
In the sink, you know that one?
Everyone has a foot in the sink story.
That one for me was, I'm making wudu, I said to him.
Yeah.
He goes, you're doing voodoo?
Yeah.
He goes, are you voodoo? What are you worshipping? I'm like, no, it's ablution. I'm just use the correct terminology. Yeah.
It's a real shame those words are so similar. It really is.
He got me because he was like, and he was disgusted because what the hell are you doing putting a foot in a sink?
Yeah.
It's like, that's the worst thing you could do. And I'm like, no, I'm just doing ablution, part of our prayers.
Yeah,
you have to start explaining that.
It's a very hard thing to explain in that situation. It's much easier over a coffee or something like that, but in that situation it's hard. Yeah. So but being a Muslim it was definitely present throughout, but it was a different way of relating to people than it is now or than it would become, because obviously September 11 changed everything, and suddenly being a Muslim meant something very different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It's not that there weren't prejudices before, or like people would find you a bit weird or whatever. That would happen, but it wasn't radioactive in the way that it sort of became. But I was at uni by that stage.
What was that? So September 11 was?
2001. So I would have been towards the end of uni. I was, I think, 5th year. Because engineering law was a 6-year degree, so I was at uni for a long time. And it was sort of near the end of that. So, but I was also involved in the Islamic Society at Melbourne Uni by that stage.
Mashallah, you did amazing stuff there.
Yeah. Well, ICV was a couple of years later, but at that time I think I might have been the president of the Islamic Society at Melbourne Uni, or if not, then on the board. I just can't remember the exact timing. There was just it was just a lot of stuff like that. So, but you know, you're at a different age then, and you're handling it in a different way, and you're doing different things. If I was in year 8 when that happened,
different.
I don't know. I mean, that would have been a really hard age to be, I think. Yeah.
Oh. So now you're at Melbourne Uni.
Yes.
Why Melbourne Uni? Did you have different offers, or that was the only offer you
got? That was the preference that I put. I think my brother went to Melbourne Uni. I think there might have been something to do with what was offered, like the version of the engineering law degree at Melbourne was different. It might have been something boring like that. The big question I had to ask was whether I wanted to stay in Australia, because one of the advantages of doing the IB was that it's an internationally recognised certificate. Right. So do I try to get into like Oxford or something? It was all that sort of stuff. But I never really thought about that for too long, because in the same way as I didn't want to leave my suburb to go to a school down the road, I didn't want to leave the country to go to a university. So who knows how that would have played out if I'd gone and done something like that. I just went to Melbourne, and because I think it just always felt like the uni. I wasn't attached to Monash at that stage, which is ironic since I ended up at Monash studying and teaching later. But it was just kind of like it felt like a natural sort of a progression.
So you were there for how long?
6 years.
6 years, mashallah.
Yeah. It's a long time to be at uni.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah.
It really changes your mind, doesn't it? It changes the way you think, the way you interact. It sort of refines your mind, uni.
For better and for worse, I think. Yeah. And then once I got to the end of uni, it was about what I wanted to do. So do I want to become a lawyer, or do I want to do something else? And media was always the other thing, and I sort of pretended to go.
So media was another thing?
It was sort of a thing I thought about, but I didn't do very much about. I remember by the time I got to the end of uni, I applied to The Age, the newspaper, for a cadetship. So they take these people out of uni. I think you have to have a degree, any degree, doesn't matter what it is. You have to go, and then you sit an exam, and they might do interviews or whatever, and then they choose their cadets, right? And you go through. And so I applied, and they got the exam date, and the exam date was the same day as the grand final, so I just didn't go.
Oh, wow.
I was like, no, I'm watching the grand final.
That's more important.
That's what I'm going to do.
Nice.
It's incredible. And around that time, I got offered a job straight out of uni as what's called a legal associate. So this is like in the family court. Yeah, so I went from there to a commercial law firm and I did what's called articles. And then I ended up actually weirdly in what was called the public law team. So that meant my main client was the state government. And so I was doing a lot. This is actually now I think about it, it's actually important because it gave me an understanding of the public world, like the world of politics, like all these sorts of things, in a way that meant I sort of got that sometimes the arguments or the disputes are not about the thing that we think they're about. They're about technical, right, arguments that, right. So I sort of got to understand that. But the other thing, and this was really important for me, was it gave me a really deep love of fiqh. I was reading high court judgments, or I remember one time I got sent to the Supreme Court library to find some, I don't know what it was, Irish case from the 1860s or something, like all these things you're reading. And then I would read a book that someone's written about, usul al-fiqh or something. And I would go, oh, this is the same argument. I mean, I was always a Muslim, right? But it sort of gave me a really deep respect and a love for the Islamic tradition. Not like what are the different conclusions? Because I think growing up, you think it's about where you put your hands.
Yes.
It's not about that. It's about how did you get to that
Destination.
conclusion, right?
Yeah. You sort of bridged that gap, didn't you? Really, to Islam and law, you bridged it in your own self and your own. That's amazing how you sort of bought that, and that would enrich your Islamic sort of.
Yeah, it sort of gave me a
identity, didn't it?
Totally, yeah. Because I think there are lots of ways into Islam, and a lot of people have different ways into it. But bottom line, I think, especially for young people in an environment where they're at the very least a minority and they might feel hostile, is I think we're all looking for something to latch onto that, I don't know if makes us proud is the wrong phrase, but it's something like that, right? Where we can go, no, that warms my heart in a way. That's something that really speaks to me or really resonates with me. And for me, I mean, I don't want to give you the impression that everything about Islam was law for me, but that was the moment it became deep and rich. Whereas for other people, it's a totally different thing, right? They'll have different ways into it.
It's amazing. Everyone has different light bulb moments. It's kind of like through having different guests on the podcast. It's amazing the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlightens through you for him to bring you through to him.
Totally.
And it depends about your mind, the way you think. Sometimes it's about the way you are as a human. You know what I mean? SubhanAllah, like, we've had brothers that, it was just a differentiation. Somebody who's white, blue eyes coming up to him and telling him, hey, read the Quran. And it's like, hey, you know what I mean? That was something that was a
profound moment. How's this white, blue-eyed kid telling me?
I know how to Arabic. I know how to read Arabic.
But you know what? It's interesting you say that, because the point I was making before about feeling pride, I think that's why Muslims get so overexcited about convert stories. Because I think it's that, right? It's like, oh, hang on, I thought this was just for people who were born with it and didn't really, like, it's just sort of ran into it, right?
Yeah.
But, oh, no. And then they become inspirational more than they should, really. Like, we shouldn't be relying on that. But I guess it's human nature.
It is.
You have these things that get reflected back to you. And so for me, that was like, it was just a profound, I don't want to call it a moment, because it was actually a period of years. But it was profound because it also made me understand in a much deeper way why Muslims are so diverse.
SubhanAllah.
And why we reach completely opposite. When I say we, I don't even mean just us. I mean the ulama. Reach completely opposite conclusions based on the same thing, whatever. And I came to love that rather than to be confronted or confused by it.
And I think there's a lot of our youth currently are confronted by it. And I've had people say to me, why there's so many different opinions? We think so differently, we act so differently. But subhanAllah, how Islam, subhanAllah, enters us through so many different portals.
Yeah.
And alhamdulillah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
It's beautiful that you're sharing that, because it's a completely different portal. And subhanAllah, it's good to see, like, somebody, mashallah, your thinking and your depth, because we can see, mashallah, even listening to you and watching you on TV, you can see the depth of your discussions and the amount of thinking you put into those topics, you know what I mean? Allahu Akbar. And sometimes not everyone can do that. And you can see all that training that you've sort of gone through, mashallah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it seems like he was getting you very prepared.
He blessed you to get to that.
SubhanAllah, when we sit down with an individual like yourself, we can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is planning. SubhanAllah, like, you know what I mean? Just amazing how he's planning for a greater cause, that he's giving you the skill sets you've picked up along the way that you didn't realize that was so important.
Well, even in your own, I mean, everyone would have that with their own life. You stop and think about it. Like, one thing I often think about, because I often get asked by, like, it could be school groups or whatever, how do you achieve this? Or like, what was your plan for this? Or what's your 5-year plan now? And to be honest, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, I think it's probably a bad thing, but like, I'm hopeless. I've never had a plan. I've never done, I'm probably the opposite of you guys, right? Because you run businesses, you actually, without that, you guys die, right?
Exactly.
But whereas I was just, I just went through life like an idiot, basically, and just doors open. If there's a door open, and I kind of walk through it and see what happened. And, like, that's so I had
that's the epitome of
another,
tawakkul, really, in a way as well.
I wouldn't make it that noble. It was probably more just negligence, but sure, I'll take it. Jazakallah khair. But yeah, so like that was kind of the way I went through it. But I think in the end, the thing I experienced that is fascinating is every time I made my mind up, this is what I want and this is what I'm going for, it didn't happen. Just didn't happen. And so I basically never got what I wanted. And alhamdulillah, because what I got was, well, I assume anyway.
Well, you did get what you want, because we know about a story that you're trying to get something you wanted and then it was rejected a few times.
Yeah.
You ended up getting what you wanted.
I got a feeling I know.
We have inside information.
And I'm filled with regret about no, not at all. You're referring to my wonderful wife.
Your amazing wife.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite stories, when she said to me, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man alive.
I'm just trying to think about you not getting what you wanted. It brought me back.
Well, that was an interesting example too.
Nasib,
like,
that's called Nasib.
Yeah, it is.
How
Right?
Allah
Because
subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the hearts. It's amazing.
yeah, and I don't doubt that she meant that when she said that to me. And my response was I was obviously very hurt by it, but I was saying, okay, well, and I just went away. And then one day, I don't even remember how long it was now, but she took it all back.
Amazing.
So, sometimes it was just things are written, you can't.
Allahu Akbar.
She tried to resist Allah. But I think about it with work, right? Like, towards the end of my time as a lawyer, I was on the board of the Islamic Council of Victoria.
Mashallah. You guys did amazing stuff.
It was an incredible time to be there, because that
would have been so challenging.
The heat of the war on terror. Like, it was.
How did you get pushed into that is the question.
Do you know what? I think it was Yasser Solomon who was the president at the time. What a contribution.
What a contribution.
In just so many ways. Like, I have so much admiration and affection for that man. But so there was him and I think Bilal Cleland were on the board at the time. It would have been 2003. So that's the Iraq War's just started, I think.
That's right.
And they just asked me, I must have been the president of the Islamic Society at Melbourne Uni or something like that, or I'd just been that. And they just said, hey, would you be interested in being on the board? And I said, yeah, maybe. Let me have a think about it. That's my memory of what I said. Oh, wow. And anyway, at the next meeting, which I had no idea about, I was on the board. They had approved it. I don't think I ever gave my consent. It just happened.
But you knew Ahmed Imam, Ramsey then closely?
Well, so Ahmed Imam and Ramsey weren't on the board at that time.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
That all came later.
Oh, so you were the first.
I was, of that group. And I just remember, so suddenly I was on this thing, having not really said I was going to do it. I was doing it. And then it kind of came out somehow. I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but I kind of ended up being the media guy on it.
Yeah, the media.
And at that time, there was a really big thing, which a lot of people have forgotten about, which would have been the religious vilification case against the group called Catch the Fire Ministries, who held some seminar and they said some stuff about Islam and about Muslims, and there were some Muslims at the thing and they were upset about it and they wanted to bring this case. But that all happened before me.
Yes, yes.
And then that case happened in VCAT, the administrative tribunal. So not quite a court, but it was slightly a level below. And maybe because I was the legal guy or something, suddenly out the front staring at cameras and press conferences talking about this thing, which had nothing to do with me. I mean, I just happened to be.
Wow.
So that was your first sort of.
So you got
That
chucked
was
in the deep
kind
end.
of where it came in, yeah. And in the lead up to that, I'd started trying to write pieces here and there in newspapers, and I managed to get one published, or one or two published, and I was so blown away that I'd managed to do this because I just thought that would never happen and all this sort of stuff. I remember the first article I ever got published was in The Age, the Sunday Age, November 24, 2002. I still remember it. And I remember I didn't sleep that night.
Wow.
And then I remember hearing the paper get delivered and landing on the driveway. I was like, it was just
What was that one
incredible.
about?
That was about Fred Nile in New South Wales had said something about either banning hijabs or niqabs or abayats or something like that. I think it might have been all of it. And I wrote this piece about it. And then I remember hearing John Howard, who's the Prime Minister at the time, he didn't disagree with it. He just said, I don't have a clear response. And I was just like, wow, this is a moment. And so I wrote this thing, and via a long process we can kind of get to, it ended up being published in Sunday Age. And I was just, it felt like, you know when you're a kid and it's your birthday?
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. It's the only time I've had that feeling as an adult. Like,
that would have been one of the proudest moments.
yeah, it's funny. I don't actually think about it that often now, but yes, like at that time it was just
that
unbelievable.
feeling.
Yeah, it was like, wow, literally like the age.
Yeah.
Like this thing, because when I was a kid, I used to sit on like the ducted heating at home and open up the Age. And it was broadsheet, right? It was like bigger than
right, yeah.
I could have slept under it.
That's right.
And I was just suddenly, oh wow, I'm going to be in that. Like it's just hard to get my head around. Right? Anyway, so that was a huge moment, and that was before the ICV stuff. So maybe it was partly I'd been doing a little bit of that, and that's kind of how the media stuff all grew. But to go back several threads of conversation, like one of the only things I really wanted to do was be a columnist for the Age.
Wow.
And when I was at a lawyer, that's kind of all I wanted to do. And it was one of the only times in media really that I put myself forward. And I was like, hey, you know my writing. Do you think we could? And I could not get through the door. I could never.
Subhanallah.
I got close at one point. They were thinking maybe we could do a thing where you join us as staff and there's a column involved, but there's other things and whatever.
Wow.
And it didn't matter what rein I pulled. It didn't matter what I said. I could not. And I just thought, this will never happen. And this would have been around 2007. So by that time, I'd been writing quite a lot. I had a book come out in 2007. So it's not like I hadn't written or hadn't published. Like, I was but I couldn't.
Couldn't crack it.
I couldn't. And so this is an example of that thing where it's like, I had a plan and Allah had a plan.
SubhanAllah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So whenever I wanted something, no. But like, but getting into media properly. So my first full-time media job, or near enough, was on radio at the ABC. I didn't ask for that. They came to me. After that, I ended up on commercial television, right, on the project.
But before that, we know of something.
Yes. Okay.
Channel 31.
Yeah, Channel 31.
Come on, we can't forget that.
Well, even this one, right? So this is,
Tell us how that came about.
Come on, Channel 31, man. We were there on Channel 31 waiting to watch.
I mean,
it.
this is the highlight. So it was a group of friends. Most of us had either grown up together or known each other for a while. A lot of the YMA guys,
Mohammed Dagestani.
that sort of thing.
Dagestani.
Dagger got involved towards the end.
Yes.
Towards the end,
But like Ahmed Imam and Ahmed Hassan, whatever, they were from the start. We were playing a board game at my house. I can't remember the game. Maybe Categories or Pictionary or something. Anyway, and somehow the idea of a show on community TV came up. I don't know how. And Susan and I were talking about, that sounds like it'd be a great idea. But that was it. We just left it. But Ahmed Hassan, being Ahmed Hassan, if anyone knows Ahmed Hassan, you will know, like, an incredible guy as well. But he's just like, okay, I'll just look. And he rang them and he did the thing and he just asked if they could do this and whatever. And he came back and goes, yeah, it's quite achievable. Like in his very quiet sort of way. And this is how we do it. So even that, I didn't put in, I can't claim I didn't put in the effort to make that happen. It just sort of happened, right?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
So yeah, and then we did that for a few years, and we won like the Channel 31 award,
I remember
the
that.
Golden Antenna or whatever it was called, and all that sort of stuff. And then SBS, they came to us and said, "Hey, we think this could work on SBS," and we did that. Maybe it was the perfect experience for everything that would come later once media became my dominant job. But like, you get in a way used to the hate mail, and you begin to learn from it what matters and what doesn't.
Mm.
And I don't know, there were people who were telling us off for laughing.
Mm. That extreme and that extreme.
And there were non-Muslims who were, because we got hate mail from non-Muslims.
Yeah, you get it from both things.
Yeah, and there were people who were saying things like, "I didn't know Muslims could laugh." Or were allowed. So when you have those two things together, you kind of, it's clearer to you what you're actually doing. In some way, the criticisms clarify things for you.
It's like
one of the
two ropes pulling you but that way.
Yeah, but it also means, okay, so you've told me why this is necessary in a way, not meaning to, but you have. And you've told me why this approach is the wrong approach. Like that's kind of, and you sort of navigate yourself.
Yeah.
There's a great, and I don't mean to cast this into really high terms. There was a great statement, I think, I'm more than happy to be corrected. I think it was Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who described taqwa as walking between two thorns.
Yes.
I'm not trying to say, Salam Cafe is like the peak of taqwa, but I just mean it's a bit like that.
Yeah. Navigating.
You're constantly getting information from the various thorns. But you're right about the community at that time. Like it was the height of intra-communal sectarianism. There was some really quite hardcore attitudes.
Yeah.
And the big thing we used to get attacked for was having men and women on the same desk.
Yes, I remember.
We used to get that a lot. Which was fascinating. Yeah, and my favourite bit of hate mail, and I think that was actually part of the laughing thing. I don't think they were opposed to us laughing. It was, how can you laugh in the presence of the opposite sex? Like I said, I thought, yeah, okay. I mean, I sort of get where you, but
yeah, they wanted a shield between you.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I don't know what exactly.
And you started. What's called as well was the comedian
Nazim.
Nazim was doing
part of that. Yeah,
yeah. So he got
and a lot of sketches and things like that.
Yeah,
but I think one of the things about it was. With the mixed desk, my favourite bit of hate mail was, I think, directed at me, and it was like, what does your wife think of what you're doing? And I was like,
that is my wife.
She's right. She's right there. And that's when I thought, they're not watching that closely. Like they're not paying that much attention. And it's not that they have no, I don't deny people their criticisms, like fine. But you kind of realize the ones you can go, that's not, we shouldn't pay undue attention to that. And the big thing I learned through that is sometimes the best thing is to keep going. Because what was amazing is we got to Channel 31 and then suddenly they loved us. Sorry, to SBS. Suddenly they loved us because, oh wow, this is like, it's become a success. And then people attach themselves to the success of it in a weird sort of way. Yeah, there's sort of a different attitude that.
Now can I get an ad?
Yeah, right. This was it was kind of this weird sort of thing, but also, we were making it with people who had been sincere Muslims for all their lives. Like it wasn't.
Good bunch. Yeah,
we call you the A team.
Really? I don't know that.
We call you the A team because ICV.
Oh, that sort of stuff.
You guys did a lot of good work.
But I wasn't. Yeah, definitely not part of that. I mean, I'm thinking about Ahmed Imam. Literally, his dad's an imam, and his dad was a guest on our show. If what we're doing is that bad, I don't think the sheikh is rocking up to. 100%. So there were things like that, and we had clear rules. So I was like, no, we don't make fun of Islam. We're not going to do that. we'll make fun of ourselves.
Yes. Look, even watching it, I was like amazing to see the ability for Muslims to be actually seen on TV.
Yeah.
Let alone, having, because we could resonate with what you were talking about, the subjects you were talking about was amazing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Muslims, that's the other thing you don't forget is the vast bulk were on board. And you can always get lost in paying attention to the critics. Yeah. And I want to be really careful here. I'm not one of these people who says just ignore your critics. I think this was, Imam al-Ghazali made this point that the testimony of your enemy is one of the ways that a mirror is held up to you, right? So I don't think you discount these things, but it also doesn't mean that you just concede all the time. You don't have to have fights about it or whatever. But that's, so we had those clear red lines where it's like, we're not going to make fun of anything sacred. That's not what we do. We're not going to, veer off into kufr for the sake of a laugh. Yeah. That's not what we do. And sometimes the criticism would come in and you'd go, no, they've actually just got that bit wrong. Yeah. Like they think that us laughing at Muslims and the stuff we do and get up to is us laughing at Islam, and that's not actually. And we would laugh at each other. One of my favorite things that we used to do occasionally was Ahmed Hassan would do a segment. I don't know how long this lasted, but it was called It's a Muslim Thing. And he would just talk about stuff that exists in the world that actually Muslims either invented or made a big contribution to. So I think he did one on coffee once, and he might have done one on algebra and stuff like this, right? And I really loved that segment because he's totally sincere. He loves that stuff. Yeah. He lives for that stuff, right? Yeah. He will know all of the bits and pieces of it. Like he loves it. But at the same time, the setup was kind of he does this and then we tease him for just never shutting up about this stuff. And it kind of works, at least that's my memory of how it works. And it kind of works well, right? Because he gets to say his thing. He gets to people get to get a sense of him as a character. He's the guy who's into this. SubhanAllah. Not all Muslims are obsessed with this. At the same time, it's interesting stuff for an audience, especially a non-Muslim audience that may never have heard of this stuff. But we're not taking ourselves too seriously. And we're kind of going, yeah, we get it. The glory days, okay. So in a vehicle like that, so many things about Muslim life and attitudes of the community are reflected, right? Yeah. And it's just little things like that I think were, I think Nazim, the stuff Nazim did, and also Amr, because they were really close friends. Like some of the stuff they did was, I thought, brilliant because it was making multiple points at the same time, right? Yeah. It would lampoon like really radical positions that were kind of a bit out of touch with the community. Yes. At the same time as it would lampoon the people who kept trying to attack Muslims on that basis. It was able to do those things, and so I mean that's a lot of skill, and it's no accident that. These guys have gone on to do.
Dagger was fun, my funny man.
Dagger should have been. Dagger should have been David Chappelle.
Well, see, because Dagger. Well, I mean, this is the thing. A lot of these guys I knew from like the YMA camps, the entertainment night that happened on the last night of camp or whatever. They'd get up and do all these crazy stuff. So I think Dagger. This was around the time Gordon Ramsay was really big, and so Dagger started doing Chef Ramsay. Chef Ramsay.
Chef Ramsay.
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, it's just you look back on it. I'm sure it's very stupid, but part of it was being stupid, right?
SubhanAllah.
Yeah. But yeah, even that, kind of an accident.
Take us through how did the project come about? Because obviously said, felt these things are falling onto you.
Yeah, so I knew people at the project literally when it launched because a lot of them came from the ABC. So I kind of knew the guys and I was involved, but I was never on the desk or anything. And I had nothing to do with them for years, right? There was gaps in all this. But then the big thing that happened was actually the 10th anniversary of September 11, because they wanted to do a special show for that. So obviously 2011. Right. So they were just seeking my views on what sort of things they might want to cover. Yeah. And I didn't, it's not up to me to tell them, but I just said, you might not know about this or you might have heard about that. And they did a bunch of stuff. And from my memory of it, they did a really good job. And so a month later, they asked me to come in again. And then they started asking me to do that on a weekly basis. Eventually, they turned around and offered me that job. So that's kind of how it happened. But so all of this was kind of, I don't know if accident is too strong a word, but it's not far off an accident. Like I was about. I guess, I mean, I was interested and they would have known that, but I wasn't knocking on a door. I wasn't sending in my resume to, it wasn't that kind of situation. Media doesn't work that way often.
Yeah.
Right. So it kind of all just happened.
Organically.
Yeah, it's like it happened to me. It's not quite right, but you know what I mean. It's, yeah. I remember the first time I ever hosted the show, as in sat in Charlie's chair. I'd literally never seen the show. So this was really early. This was like 2011. I had been in Jakarta for some conference and I flew overnight, the overnight flight to Australia, and I had to get back to Australia because I was giving a speech somewhere and I was jet lagged and I had a headache and I was busy, and I got this call from the producer, the same one who asked me about what to do with the 10th anniversary of 9/11 show. And I just said, he said, "Oh, Charlie's sick. Do you reckon you'd be prepared to fill in for him?" And I was like, this is a terrible idea. I'm jet lagged. I feel terrible. I don't really have time for this today. No, of course not. But for some reason, what came out of my mouth was, yeah, sure. And then he said, okay, don't lock it in yet. It may not happen. I've got to go through all the official things, but I just thought I'd check. And then we went away. I went and did my thing. And then he got back to me and said, you're on. And suddenly I'm in this situation where it's like, well, what have you done?
Wow.
Why? But I got to do it.
Yeah.
So I went along and then I talked myself into it because I thought, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? It can go absolutely terribly and it'll be really embarrassing and then it'll be over and I'll have a story to tell for the rest of my life. Or it'll go well and then, well, who knows? Anyway, I went there, I did the show, and I distinctly remember before the last segment, so we're in the ad break, just before the last segment, and I distinctly remember having this thought. And I just went, well, Waleed, here's one thing you've discovered that you definitely cannot do. That was absolutely, I was like, well, you know, but I was fairly happy-go-lucky about it. It's just like, well, it's just, you may as well have a go and see what happens. And then I remember getting out of the studio, finished the show, I was getting changed, and the executive producer came down and he got off the phone and he said to me, and I don't know if this is true or not, I assume it's true, I don't know why he would lie. He said to me, I didn't tell you this before, but we had a focus group watching this show in Sydney or whatever, and I just want to say that was great. Congratulations. Feedback's amazing. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. Anyway, so I guess what I'm saying with that story is it was all really a story of an opportunity came. I didn't overthink it terribly much. I figured I didn't have that much to lose. I kind of did it, and then stuff happened.
It's kind of like speaking to you now, I've realized you never shy away from giving it a go.
Yeah.
And see where it takes you.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much?
Yeah. Not
like just hearing all your stories, it's like, okay, Salam Cafe came up, let's try it. The radio came, let's try it. It's not like you're like, this is the place to be, I'm going to do this, but you're always giving it a try.
Which I don't know if that's the typical, that's not the self-help book that you normally read.
Yeah. That's okay.
But it's kind of what happened to me. And I think that, so I often, it's a tricky situation because I get asked a lot by like, you know, journalism students or whatever, how do you do whatever? And I'm like, guys, I'm the worst person to ask because I don't know. I didn't have a...
But we should ask him. Want to start a burger business?
You probably say yes.
Sure.
The Waleed burger.
Yeah, imagine that. But it was like, I think what it was in the end was I wasn't afraid to stuff up. Like my first ever radio shift was like that. They asked me to fill in on local radio in Melbourne. So this was ABC on 774 is the thing.
Drive, isn't it? The drive, the morning drive.
I was filling in for John Fain. Yeah,
John Fain. That's right. I remember listening to you that one.
Was he one of your mentors as well?
Yeah, I'll get to mentors in a sec actually because this is a really interesting story. But I remember doing that and they asked me, would you want to host? And I was like, that's a terrible idea. I don't have the skills for that. Like I accept I have some skills, but I don't have those skills. And they actually talked me into it. And then I went and did it. But it was the same thought process. It was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'm embarrassed for a bit. But then you know what happens? Someone else does something embarrassing pretty soon after that, and then they become So in a way, it was kind of, I didn't appreciate or think that much about the enormity of I still don't know it was enormous. I don't think about it I didn't think about it that
That's
way.
That's how we thought when we first started the podcast, isn't it? It was like, well, you know what?
What's the worst gonna happen?
First couple are going to be shocking, but you know what? We'll see what happens.
But yeah, it's, one of the people who was my, I guess, I never had a formal mentors, but like, I guess was de facto mentor. One of them, in a totally different situation, he just said to me, yeah, your first game's not going to be your best game.
Yeah,
That's okay. And it's,
I love that.
yeah. So, but the principle I learned from that, and this is what I often say to those journalism students or whatever who are asking, is one thing I learned is that action brings reaction. So work brings things. If you do things, then things happen. If you do nothing, then nothing happens.
nothing happens,
That seems to be. That didn't mean that everything I did was good. It didn't but it happened. Stuff opened up, and that's kind of all you can do. But I never did it with a plan.
Did you do a lot of short up with your family members, your wife, and things about?
Because they're big life decisions. I didn't do that when it was like come and do one show.
Okay.
But when it was like when I got offered that radio job at the ABC, it's like, I mean, I was an academic at that point. I stayed an academic. I was still doing my PhD and stuff like that. But like, that's a big decision.
Yeah.
When you stop and think about it, it's like, what people don't, I think, understand about broadcast is it is really wearing. It's really grinding. You're working, your brain is operating at a really fast speed. And so an hour of doing that feels like 5 hours of different, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that because I've done both kinds of jobs. I've done a job where you're not performing. And even if it's hard work or whatever, there is something about performing, I use air quotes there, that is draining, right? So you can't do it for a long period of time.
Exactly.
But if you're doing it every day, you get tired quickly until you figure out a rhythm and you figure out how to do it without switching your brain on to everything that's happening. You figure out how to focus on this and not worry about that and that sort of thing. So
can I ask, if you don't mind, we hear in our community, he sold us out. He spoke about something. Are you governed in relation to what you can say, what you can't? Are you allowed to talk about certain topics, or is it just they give you the open platform to do certain things? Can I ask about that?
Yeah. No, I don't think I've ever had anyone say you're not allowed to say X. I don't think I've ever had that.
Wow.
They might say, well, like in the meeting, if I say something, they might go, well, you realise how that will be taken, but they can't stop me saying it.
Wow.
But then there are other limits. So at the ABC, for example, and people in the UK who know the BBC would know this, would be familiar with it as well. You can't take a side on an issue in which there's debate, especially a political one, because that if you do that, especially if you do it in a certain way, you're violating the ABC Charter. Whereas on commercial radio, so if you 3RW or talkback radio, whatever, it's often all about
Your view.
opinion.
Yeah.
So what that means is, there are restrictions like that. I can't come on and tell you what I think of XYZ, unless it's something silly. Like I can tell you, I don't know what the best flavour of ice cream is. That's fine. But I can't, I can't tell you who to vote for.
Yeah.
Or I can't say this government policy is great. I can ask, I can say, I can ask people what they think, or I can put a question to them that might be something like, are there any holes in this or whatever?
Yeah.
I can, so to take an example, on the ABC, one of the big issues when I was there came up all the time was like asylum seeker policy. So I can't in the course of it. So what I'd have to do these pivots all the time, which I actually really valued. I think it's actually really important, even though it frustrates people. I'm interviewing someone who's really supportive of our boat people policy in Australia, right? Could be the immigration minister or the prime minister or whatever. And I have to try to ask all the questions that might expose the weaknesses in that position. And then I switch to someone who is a critic of that same policy. Often they'd be from the Greens.
Yeah.
So, and now I have to ask all the questions that show that their criticisms are limited or that actually there might be something to this policy. In all of that, my views don't matter. But I think what happens is a lot of people don't quite, for perfectly understandable reasons, don't quite understand the difference between asking a question and making a statement. And that often my job is to, and this is true even on commercial television for me, often my job is to ask a question whose thrust I don't agree with. Because in those moments, it's not about my opinion. It's about the view of the guest and giving the audience the opportunity for them to evaluate the guest's argument, especially if they're a politician, right? So that's a different job. Then there are times, especially on commercial television, where it is about giving a view. But no, I mean, I've never been controlled in that way. In fact, often they're encouraging me to say things that I don't really want to, right? Like an example is after the Christchurch terrorist attacks, right? So, a man walks into 2 different masajid on Jummah and just massacres, more than 50 people. And that was, obviously it was Jummah, so it was on a Friday. It's New Zealand, so it's 2 hours ahead of us, or 3 even. Yeah. 2 would have been
a couple of hours before.
2 hours. And I walk in and I just, obviously it's devastating. And I'm like, on those days, I just want to get through the day. It's hard. It's hard to explain. And I'm not asking for pity, but like on those days, the last thing you want to do is do a show.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the red light goes on, you have no choice, right? But I remember my boss came to me and said, just have a think about if there's anything you want to say. And to be honest, I don't want to say anything. But he was encouraging me to say something. And that day was remarkable because I sat there and I said, all right, eventually I said, look, I'm going to have a go at thinking about it and writing something, but you're not allowed to bank on it. So at any moment, I might turn around and say, no. So you plan your thing, but plan for the possibility of both. That's the condition. Oh, wow. And I sat there trying to write this thing and it was, it was hard to do, but I literally, so the show's on at 6:30 and I literally finished it, I think it was 6:28.
Allahu Akbar.
And they were up to that moment not sure whether this was going to happen. I missed all the production meeting. I missed we have a rehearsal, which we don't really rehearse the content of the show, but it's technical stuff. So they know where the lighting's meant to be for this and that and all this stuff. I missed all that. Just the whole, but that's an example of me saying something that if it were up to me, I wouldn't have. It's not that they weren't my views. They were. So actually what happened there is they're encouraging me to share thoughts that, like, they're pulling it out of me.
Yeah.
So there's examples like that. Yeah, but there might be examples where they say it wouldn't be wise for you to say that, but they're not saying they have a problem with me saying it. They're just saying, I know what you're saying, but that's going to be turned into that. So but that's actually, I mean, in a weird way, that's just hikmah. That's not, that's not control. Yeah. So I don't have control in that way. I mean, the stuff you're talking about, it would depend on example by example, but one of the things I've learned, and I learned this from the ICV days, I learned this from the Salam Cafe days, I learned this, is there are times where the community, what is the community anyway? I mean, it's so diverse, but like there are times where what they want is for you to say X.
Yeah.
But you can't say X because X is the kind of thing that you can only really say when your view is not going to be interrogated or analysed, right? And we all know, like within the community, we'll say things to each other that we just take as like inevitable and true. And then the minute you run into someone out the community and you say the same thing, they're like, that doesn't make any sense or whatever. every community's like this.
Yes.
This is not a Muzzo thing. It's just that every community's like
You're right.
this.
You're right.
But like it's because your views aren't being tested
Yeah.
properly.
Getting interrogated, you know,
Yeah.
every word you use, you know, they even think, like they even give thoughts to your words sometimes.
It happens all the time. I mean, but that in a way comes with the territory. Some of it's very deliberate because they know.
Can you share like maybe your first moments of that interrogation? I think because that sort of defines it, doesn't it? Like, can you share of like one of the first moments that you copped that interrogation? I recall some, but I remember when you were talk about the Catch the Fire guys. I remember a lot of. You were getting interrogated. I think that was your sort of first.
All the time, yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot of that. Because what happens in those sort of cases, you become part of a culture war. And it's like, guys, I'm not interested in this culture war, but everyone else seems to be interested in it. So you just become used as raw material. And so, you know, I don't know, opinion columnists or talkback hosts and shock jocks or whatever, they'll use your thing and then start raging at you and stuff. I mean, the first time that happens, it's kind of like, whoa. And then after a while, you begin to see that it's a game and it's not a fun game and it's a game I'd rather not play, but I can't really help it and that sort of thing. But, you know, like
it's part of the territory.
Yeah. And so that's why I actually find it hard to answer the first time because it became such a constant drumbeat that, you know, but like.
Yeah, because the reason I'm asking that is because we hear in the community, like you hear this in the community where brothers saying, oh, you know, Waleed Aly was such an amazing representative of our community. He used to speak so much for it. He was the spokesperson.
Yeah.
Some of not that you were ever a spokesperson,
but
because, you know, doing ICV
stuff, yeah.
You know what I mean? So you had that sort of platform.
They took him away from us.
You know, like,
is that what they said?
They took him away from us.
It's
Who took me away?
It's
like the media and
because
right. That's, you know, I've never heard that until this moment.
subhanAllah, like, and we've heard that where Waleed was such an amazing representation for Muslims.
Yeah.
He had an amazing voice. He was constantly speaking.
That's why I asked
we
that
felt
question.
so
Having been
proud.
silenced.
Okay.
We felt so proud of him being there as a voice.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not talking about the whole community, but there was portions, I think, of the community that believed that you're quite an amazing voice for us.
That's very kind of them.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And mashallah, you did, I can put my hand on my heart and say, mashallah, you did amazing stuff because like you were speaking of our thoughts and in such an amazing, articulate way that made us feel like we've never had that platform where we can talk about certain things within the community without taking it out of context. And mashallah, you did it amazingly well in those early stages. And then when people said, like, where's Waleed? And suddenly people said, oh, so now he's been taken into the media world. He doesn't speak for the Muslims anymore because he's too busy doing other stuff.
Or he's contracted.
He's contracted, you know what I mean? So he's been silenced.
Yeah,
so you know what I mean?
That's where that.
So that's all untrue as far as if it's meant in any kind of conspiratorial way, like, you know, they got him and they got him and they took him into an alley
locked him up.
No, it's not that. And there's
Put him in
no
a radio station.
There's no grand conspiracy. But it is true. There are things I could do as a community representative that I can't do now, and that it would be inappropriate for me to do. But there were also, but there are things I can do that I could never. I mean, the Christchurch thing's an example of that.
I mean,
right. So, and there are other community reps. Like it's not like if I'm not doing it, there's no one doing it. You know, but it's an interesting. But also, I mean, I remember those ICV days. And I remember there were times where they would smash, the people in the community would smash you because of things you said in that role that they didn't like. Yeah. But this actually, there's an interesting example that comes from that. So around the time I was doing that, it was all war on terror. The London bombings were a big part of it. All this sort of stuff was happening. And remember, there were like terror raids were happening.
That's right.
And I remember this thing kept happening where the homes, like Muslims would be raided. There'd be some ASIO raid or AFP raid or something. And then there wouldn't be an arrest. There'd be nothing.
Yeah.
And I remember as an ICV spokesperson, I would speak out quite strongly against that. And I would say, look, if there's a genuine terror threat or whatever, fine. We understand the police have a job to do, etc. But where are the arrests? If this is a serious problem, show us the money, right? And because I would hate to think that you've got these security organisations using their power just to intimidate people. And there was a quote I remember in one particular case where they said they were rattling the cages. And I thought, is that appropriate to be using raids powers just to rattle. I understand to gather evidence. I understand to prosecute a case, to lay charge. I understand that. Just rattling cages, that I'm not so sure about that. And so I would make that argument, and Muslims loved it. Then one day they raided and they pressed charges. So what I think a lot of Muslims in that moment, not clearly not all, but what a lot of Muslims wanted in that moment was for me to be upset about that. But I couldn't be upset about that if what I've said is, well, go on, lay a charge.
Yeah.
Well, now they've laid charges. So the only response that was available to me at the time, I felt, and the only response I thought that was actually just, fair, and defensible was to say, we welcome the fact that charges have been laid. If they're guilty, they're guilty. If they're not, they're not. We let justice take its course. I mean, I don't know what the language I used was, but it was broadly that sort of sentiment.
And you got executed.
Well, I didn't get executed, but there were people who were, I think, no, actually, to be fair, and I've got to be fair to the Muslim community here, a lot of people were, we understand that. Because this is the thing, and like, I don't think Muslims want, terrorists running around.
100%.
Like that's not the utopia we're envisioning. So, but I think the Muslims were very skeptical that there were people who weren't at all a threat who were being framed. So now, and so my big thing in that moment was, okay, now it's in the hands of the courts. We leave it in the hands of the courts. We don't need, politicians or whatever presuming guilt. But it's in the hands of the court, right? And that's the kind of thing a lawyer would say, right? But what I guess I'm trying to illustrate with that story is there are times, whether you get it right or wrong is a separate question. We could have that argument. But there are times where for you to be principled and to apply your principles consistently means you have to say something or take a position that people aren't going to want you to take. And the way I felt about it, about that sort of example was in the long run, me being consistent and applying these principles and demonstrating that we're not being unreasonable. We're not just being partisan. We're actually being consistent, that will pay off more. And also it felt to me the right thing to do, that will be better than doing the short-term thing of whatever happens, we're just going to get upset. So that's an example. And the same thing happens in the television world. All right. So I hear people all the time they'll discuss something, and they might not be having a go at me. They might be discussing an issue, and they'll say something, and I can tell that the way they're talking, it's not that it's invalid or necessarily wrong, but it's the way you would talk when you don't actually know the other argument or you don't know the other side of it or whatever. And one of the things about broadcasting is you very quickly get to know the other side of a lot of arguments. Not always, but a lot. And so there might be times, and I don't know what, people might be complaining about specifically, but there are times where it's like, I know you want me to say X, but what you don't understand is that'll be torn apart because I'm sorry to say this, but from where I'm standing and knowing the lay of the land, it's not a great argument. And I don't say that with disrespect. I don't say
well put.
I don't like. I totally. I have arguments that are not great. We all have. This is not. But this is what happens in communities. Is sometimes we have arguments that are not great, and we run with them because we're never really shown.
The same argument when you're having with your wife. It's not worth having sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
But subhanAllah, I think that's subhanAllah how you bring that legal world perspective, because a client
that's
would
the
come
BBC as well. Mashallah, being able to
part of
be
it.
partisan. It really not.
You know what happens? You know what happens to the ABC that's interesting on radio is there's a live feed of all the text messages that come in.
Oh, wow.
So you get to see exactly how the audience is processing. Bang. And there's a lot of times I'll ask a question or say something, and someone, bang, there's a text there presenting something I hadn't thought about or having a go at me about whatever, and I'll go, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And that's, do you know, this is this I think is one of the great things about legal training. And by the way, I'm not trying to say legal training is the ultimate kind of training or doesn't have drawbacks. I understand it. But one of the great things about that is it does give you at least some ability to be able to make an argument from a distance and go, all right, because in the law, it's like I'm representing my client. So I have to make an argument that's in the service of their thing, and that's not dishonest. I'm making the best argument that I can, and then it's for the judge or whoever to decide what's the best argument. Okay. But it means that you can make an argument for a group or a client or whatever that you may not in your personal life prefer.
Yeah.
Right? You may not be on their side.
Yeah.
But that's a personal judgment. And lawyers always get asked this question, how can you defend a criminal? and it's, I mean, I never did criminal law, but that version of that. And lawyers get very frustrated with this because it's like, no, who's decided they're a criminal? That's for the court to decide, not for me to decide before they have a trial. My job is for them to come. I will give them the best defense if I'm doing that. I will give them the best defense I can. And if they're guilty and they get convicted, they get convicted. Right. My role is to facilitate the court making that decision. It's not to prejudge someone as a criminal and then deny them that defense. That's how criminal justice works, right? 100%. So you kind of learn that sort of ability.
Amazing.
But the other thing about, and the ABC was very good at this, but I would encourage anyone who is interested either in media or even just in public debate, if they want to do it well, I don't mean if they want to just launch, but if they want to do it well, come to understand the argument that you disagree with properly. Not as a caricature, not as some kind of object of hatred and derision, but if you can get to the point where you can explain someone else's argument back to them in a way that they would recognize and they go, yeah, that's basically what I think, then you're in a position to disagree with it. Then you're in a position to tear it down. Or tear it down is very strong, you know what I mean? Yeah. Then you're in a position to have it. But if what you are going to do is just launch in without even understanding the other side of the argument, you're probably going to come up with a bad argument.
That is your superpower, mate.
Well, that's very kind.
We just nailed your superpower. You do that very well.
Mashallah, you do.
That's what resonates upon on the screen.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you do that.
You really just, that's superpower.
Well, listening to you just this week, as we know what's happening, currently out there. Hello, you did that amazingly. It's
you just bring it back home.
You bring it back to that.
Without, like you said, the facts. They're there, guys.
And it's amazing. Online. It's amazing.
It's a hard thing to do. It's hard without being, because
it's emotional.
We're brought up with emotion,
everybody wants to take a side. It's just that, and to be in the middle there,
put you
in the middle ground and understanding both sides of the argument and really be fair. And I think that's what Islam is. Mashallah, you presented that so beautifully. That's what Islam is. It's not about taking sides. It's about being honest with an argument that has two sides and really showcasing it, and then let the person really see the truth and let them make up their mind. And mashallah, you do that amazingly, mashallah.
There are times to take a side, but it's not all the time.
Yeah.
And there are ways of doing it. But I think most importantly, you can only take, I feel it's best only to take a side when you've done justice to the other side. So otherwise you're having an argument with something that doesn't exist. And it worries me a little bit, but that people, we just have this tendency. This is what we do as humans. This is kind of what we do. And you've got to be really, I think I'll be really careful about it. And I'm glad you talk about that as an Islamic thing, because that's the way I see it. And other Muslims may not see it the same way, but like I see it that way. I don't, however much I might have a problem with my opponent, I don't want to wrong them. Because in the end, like,
ولا تطغوا في الميزان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that in the Quran. ولا تطغوا في الميزان. And this is it. That's the, when it's so easy to be a taghut with the mizan.
Yeah.
And that's what legal is. That's what law is about being in that middle and understanding both sides of the argument and not being that, and mashallah. And I think a lot of the audience, I'm talking about the vast audience of Australia, internationally, mashallah, I think that not many people can do that because everybody somehow holds on to this opinion of theirs, or their identity,
and they lose the other half, which is the most important half.
Yeah,
I can have an opinion and scream at the screen, and you lose the people that you're really trying to bring to Islam or trying to awaken, the view of that topic.
Yeah,
you do
and it's like I'll get it wrong all the time. That's inevitable because I'm human, but to me, it's not about did you get it right in every instance. It's about the principles or the rules of engagement or the owner's manual.
The chess pieces, eh?
Well, just no. Because wow, you got me there.
We know where your queen is.
Yeah. No, that makes it sound like I'm trying to win everything. It's not that. It's just it's the principles you take into doing your job. In this sort of job.
Yeah, mashallah. It is. Look, it is. Look, if you don't know the game, if you go into Monopoly not knowing the rules and when you get your $200 and and I have to go around all and what 666 means.
When do I get my $200, by the way? Yeah.
All right, that's afterwards.
Right. $200 worth of pies, I think. I'm aware of that. It is that. And it's this understanding of being accountable to those who disagree with you. And I think the worst thing you can do is get them wrong.
You know what what I mean? They're seeing things on such a superficial level, on just it's very hard to dig, and I've spoken even before we did the podcast, I went out to a couple of kids who were like uni students, and I said, what do you think of Waleed? You know what I mean? Like just to see that, and they're Muslim kids, you know what I mean? Like Muslim kids, what do you think of Waleed? Oh, subhanAllah, sometimes, he doesn't give the Muslims, the argument that he should. And one guy goes to me, subhanAllah, I find him a little bit, the way he presents for Islam is a bit, he should be more softer on Islam and stuff like that. And I said, subhanAllah, you guys, it's amazing. And then when I give them that context, I said, it's interesting you say that. I said, but if you were in the hot seat and you had that pressure point, you know what I mean? And you were dissected so much. When you're in the limelight, you're getting dissected, and you're being dissected so much. How would you be? And they don't think about that. So that's that superficial world that a lot of
and I totally get that because I wouldn't either. I don't think if I were in there, and it doesn't mean they're wrong either. By the way, I'm not saying that I get it right. I'm just saying I do my best. And I think in the end, the way I try to think about it is. I have an audience of one, really, and if I can, if I'm comfortable with this on Qiyamah, then that's actually what matters. What doesn't matter is whether it got shared a lot, or that's not the bit that matters. And I'm sort of reluctant to say this because I don't want it to. Share as a thing, but I think about that a lot. That's and maybe on Qiyamah I'll have lots of regrets, but inshallah not. And I think I'm constantly after guidance, from Allah, from other people who I trust, people who also get the situation because that's an important part of it. That's a really crucial aspect of it. And it's the whole package. I think about this with, I fear for people who want a public position or a public role. And this will seem like a strange, perhaps hypocritical thing for me to say. It is a difficult and tricky place to be as a Muslim, because it's so easy. There are so many traps, and this is probably true in every line of work, but I think there's something about, there is constantly an ego question you've got to be wrestling with in every moment. There's, I don't know how to explain this without going on too long, but I remember talking to a group of young Muslims on a leadership retreat of some sort, and we were talking about the kind of work I do, and I tried to explain. People think that the hard part about my job Islamically, or as a Muslim, is what do I say here, or getting involved in that argument or whatever. And yeah, they're all relevant. The hardest bit, actually, at the risk of sounding unusual, is figuring out how to do Maghrib with khushu' 2 minutes before you're on air.
Allah.
That's actually,
Allah.
or like losing those aspects of it. Because I've had it's hard to explain.
overwhelming,
People
of course.
understand like the way that it works. People would have versions of this of their own job, like whether they're on a factory floor or running a business, or whatever. But like, I remember there were lots of times I'm doing radio, I would stop at like, let's call it 7 p.m. for a 5-minute break because the news bulletin is on, and I have to be back on at 7:05.
Allah.
That's my window.
SubhanAllah.
If you haven't got wudu, you're in massive trouble.
Allah.
But it's like, okay, so now I've got to, there's something about praying with the clock ticking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're the things actually to pay attention. I don't mean to say that the stuff with the job itself is minimum. I don't mean that. I just mean there's a whole lot of other stuff that's part of it. And it's very easy to forget those sorts of things.
That's so important.
Even little things like, and I fall foul of this all the time, but like, wow, there's a joke there. I can see it, and it's a really funny joke. And I shouldn't go for it. I made a decision once, just within myself, for example, I am not going to make any jokes about Donald Trump's appearance. Not a hard joke to make. It's a whole genre of jokes.
Yeah.
I could even detail the specific things that are constant punchlines. I just made a decision. No, that's not what I'm going to do. It's little things like that actually are, the big things are obvious. I'm not saying they're not there, but it's little things like that are kind of the bigger things. And there's something about doing a job that's public that carries certain kinds of risks, not so much about the work, but about the heart. And so, social media is really tricky and I think dangerous in that way because it's putting everyone in that situation. Whereas I don't do social media at all. And one of the things I really value about that is I do my show. I come off air. The world doesn't need to hear from me. I don't need to broadcast anything. It's in this box. There are rules around it. There's a discipline involved in it. Like that sort of matters to me. And so I think it's, great if Muslims want to get involved in public affairs and in whatever field, I think that's great. But all I would say, and I 100% mean this as advice to me as well, is you have to be paying attention to yourself in every moment because it's so easy for it to become about pride, for it to become about defense.
Me.
But about that, how do you humble yourself? How do you humble yourself? Like, mashallah, like I've been with you. Like I've been with you.
Like that.
Like, I've been with you, like, for example, at functions, and it's amazing how many people line up to want to have a chat to you. And like, you see that these young kids, they see on TV, they look up to you, what do you do? Is there anything that you specifically do to you that sort of brings you sort of back to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which scholar it was who said this. I think it was Ibn al-Qayyim, I think. I probably shouldn't say that when I'm not 100% sure. But whenever you're getting praised, you should immediately think of all the ways in which you know it's wrong and you remember. So often people will say something about me and I go, yeah, if only you knew. And I think that's an important process. I had a rule back from the Islamic Council Victoria days, which is as much as possible, don't read all the attacks, but don't read the praise.
Wow.
You can't just have one.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, I'm gonna stop reading all the attacks for my mental health. But if someone says something great about me, I need to know about that. I don't think you can do that. I think it really comes down to a relatively small group of people who actually know you, understand your situation, and will give you good advice. And that's really your mirror.
That's the shura, isn't it?
You can't, I have people like that.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, you know, and
Allah bless
No,
him,
man.
bless
and
you.
it's really important, I think. But I'm just talking about the things that I think I experienced that are particular to public life, and that most people in public life, even if they're like a sheikh or something.
Yeah. And honestly, like, it's scary being in the public life, because I see and I've heard so many stories from so many brothers, you know, being in the public life, you know, knowing Sheikh Fahmy and understanding him and being with him such a long time and seeing his public life and how people, you know, you got a cop, you know what I mean? It's not easy. It's not an easy world out there. A lot of people wish upon themselves this kind of business, but bro, it's not for the lighthearted. You got to be a deep thinker. You got to contemplate every sort of move you're making, because everybody's just homing in on you like a laser.
Yeah. But what do they say? That famous people crave obscurity and obscure people crave fame?
It's amazing. And I don't think everybody, I think a lot of people that don't choose fame get fame, subhanAllah. You know what I mean? Like you say that, like a lot of people that don't choose it end up doing it, and people that are choosing it end up going into it and then falling apart through it, you know?
Yep. And some people choose it and they go after it, and we don't know. Maybe that's the means by which, you know, the means of their destruction. We don't know.
On a good note, take us through some mentors, some people that
Sorry,
are...
yes. Don't get back to this. There were a few actually, because for me, as far as media was concerned, it started really with writing. And the big moment actually was, it was literally the Tuesday after September 11. So this will sound like a weird thing to say in that context. I'm a big Richmond fan, right, in the AFL.
Yes, you wrote Bash's book.
I did,
Mashallah,
yeah. I mean, what a guy he is.
What a guy, mashallah.
But Richmond were in the finals, and September 11, no, it wasn't the Tuesday after September 11, it was September 11, before the attack had happened. Richmond were training because they were playing a semi-final against Carlton that weekend, and I went to the training session. And I just went there. I took my sister-in-law and her kids, and she's in hijab and whatever. So we look kind of, I guess, like a family. Anyway, I go training, whatever, big deal. We kick the footy on the ground, go home. That night, September 11 happens. That Saturday is the semi-final, Richmond-Carlton. September 11 has just happened. I'm sitting in the stands. I'm reading the newspaper. There's an article there by a guy who I'd always really loved. His writing I loved. His name's Martin Flanagan, right? Sports journalist at the Age. But he always did sport in a really quirky, very sociological way. He was interested in people and stories. He wasn't interested in hamstrings and scores.
Yeah.
So I'm reading his article, and it was called something like Letting the Game Go On in the Face of Adversity. And he was talking about the relationship between sport and tragedy, and how, you know, the importance of football during the war, for example, and stuff like this, and how odd playing a semi-final when September 11th just happened would be, and all this. In the article, he says he was at Richmond training on the Tuesday, and he said he looked around and he saw a Muslim family. I saw a woman in a headscarf and some kids and a Muslim man, and I saw a Muslim family, and I think the quote was something like, and I thought about how great this game can be. They were just another Richmond family. And bear in mind, I've always admired this guy. And I was like, I'm just in the stand reading this thing, and I'm like, what?
It's me.
Anyway, so I went home and I emailed him, I think, and I just said, you don't know me, but you actually just wrote about me, because I referred the thing, and I said, by the way, I'm interested in writing and I'm interested in media stuff. If you've got any advice, let me know. Anyway, I must have left my phone number, because a couple of days later, I got a call from him.
Wow.
And he's like, I'm at uni, and at this time, this is when newspapers are a massive deal. So anyone who writes in a newspaper, it's not that they're a celebrity, but it's like, well, they'd never just have a chat. Like it just, anyway. And I just remember picking up the phone, and he was like, is that Waleed? And I said, yeah. And he goes, Waleed, that's Flanagan. He always would talk that way. And we just had this huge chat. And at the end of, and I thought that was going to be it. And at the end of the conversation, he said, if you write anything and you want me to take a look at it, send it along.
Allahu Akbar, yeah.
And so I did, and I had some thoughts, and because, you know, 9/11's just happened, there's a lot going on. I've got things that so anyway, I just did it, and I sent it to him. And he called me back later and just said, I remember this line, he said, writing's a bit like footy. You can either play or you can't, and you can play.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
I still remember, like, it's a big moment for me.
Wow.
And we struck up a really good relationship. He would look at stuff I'd written. He would give me advice on it. And then it got to, let's go back to November 24, 2002, that first piece that got published because I sent it to him and he said, I think that's good. It's really good. I think I know the editor to send it to. And so he passed it on and that editor published it. So this guy, Martin Flanagan, I mean, he'd be close to 70 now. He lives in Tassie now. He's moved there. He's from Tassie originally. His brother is Richard Flanagan, the really celebrated author. He comes from, a literary family. Amazing. He's an amazing storyteller in that very Irish way. Yeah. And he was the guy really, without him, it's all his fault basically. He was just so generous in that and he saw something. The way he put it to me is you've got the diamond, you just need to learn how to cut it. That was his thing. And everyone would have a story like that with a mentor, right? That's how that works.
That's the beauty. That's you exactly there. Sometimes, see that I believe in you, I will help you believe in you. And again, so many of us have had that one situation where somebody says, you know what, you're pretty good at this. Yeah. Because we have so much self-doubt. We have so much self-doubt. Even when we know we can do something so well, we still internalize, nah, I'm not good. I can't do this and I'm no way. And then when you get somebody of a high caliber telling you, wow, you got this. Yeah. Automatically, all these dissipate.
Has he remembered it since then?
Yeah, it's
you can play the game.
It was a really big moment.
But the second point there, and I think it wouldn't have ever happened unless he got off his bum and went out and sent that email. Yeah. And this is what we tell the kids at the retreat. It's like, you must at least commit a small action that will open the gate. And trust me, whenever you ask anyone out there, wallahi, they will always reply a minimum. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you got to, but nobody's going to be calling you. He's not going to ever kind of call you and say, hey,
out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. It's never going to happen.
That's true.
And subhanAllah, how much that is profound for you.
Made a big difference, yeah.
It made a big difference in your life. And that's one interaction, one email.
Yeah. It was amazing, yeah. And then, we're friends for ever after that. And then,
we've had similar stories.
Amazing.
We've all had, I think, similar stories. Anybody who has, it's amazing how those doors open. You know what I mean?
What's the worst case scenario? You never got back to you?
Just don't get back to me.
No,
it's not an issue. He's not going to write back and say, never contact me again. And even if he did, I guess I'll never contact him again. The other person was, I mentioned before, was John Fain. So he's, I still think, incredible broadcaster.
Amazing.
Formidable intellect and just ability at doing that. I've done that job. I've done that shift a lot. I know what's involved. It's exhausting. You've just got to be across everything. It's amazing.
You got to get up really early.
Yes, that's the other thing, which I don't love. There's something about 6 a.m. trying to read something about the budget going, this is not what life's meant to be. Anyway, but he was the one actually who convinced me to do the broadcast stuff. He's the one who said, no, you can do this. And I think he loved the idea as well of a Jewish guy who goes on holidays and gets replaced by a Muslim guy. I think he thought that was great fun. He seemed to love that. But he's always very generous. We'd have lunch or whatever, and everything happened quickly with him, because that's when you live in a world of talkback radio, everything's like this. Everything's just constant. And so it's like, doing a lot of clicking today. Everything's constant. So that was talking to him felt like you were on air. Like you get to the end of a sentence and he's already on the next. He's like that. He's very sharp, but he was great, and he gave me the confidence and the backing to do it. And I think he was probably the one. I don't know for sure, but I think he was the one who convinced the management, this is your guy. Without Flanagan, I'd probably never write in media. And without John, I probably don't do broadcast. So they're probably the two in a media. I mean, I got a lot of other people who would be mentors in my life more generally, and certainly Islamically and whatever. But professionally,
that's amazing.
Yeah, those guys.
Amazing story. So you guys, get up there, send that email, try.
Well, wallah, that's the key. Wallah.
Also, give John Fain a call. He's retired.
He's got a couple of million phone calls.
He's an interesting guy because he'll put you in your place pretty quickly. If you're making a stupid argument, he'll let you know. He's one of those. Which is exactly the job, right?
We love ending up podcast on a I am statement.
Oh no! Don't do this.
This is what we try to end it always with an I am statement, and subhanallah, I think every one of us is so unique in the way they sort of put that in single statement. Yeah,
There's so many different ways I could take this. Part of me really just wants to say, I'm trying, and stop there because that's important. I think sometimes we can get caught up in the outcome rather than in the process, the effort, which of course as Muslims we understand that the outcome's not, that's not on us and that's not the point. And I feel like we worry about that. But do you know what I would say, and this is, I'm making this as a professional, like as a work sort of a statement, the way I think about what I'm trying to do is, what's the best way to phrase it? I'm trying to make people who are divided see each other clearly.
Allahu Akbar.
That's probably what I'm doing.
You're doing an awesome job.
It wasn't always the case. It was different. There were different phases. Sometimes it was, like in the post 9/11 era, a lot of it, especially on ICV, it's a community representative role and that's my job. But as we enter a world that is increasingly divided on everything, all the time, I feel like one of the best things we could do is learn to see each other clearly. Yeah, it's probably the organizing principle for what.
Because we've all been there or there. We have. It's a hard thing to be there. It is.
And the way I put it once, because I mentioned I wrote a book in 2007, and a lot of what that was doing is like kind of saying, I don't require everyone to love each other. You don't have to love everyone, but at least hate them for the right reasons. At least understand them properly.
How today I see you as a double-sided mirror that gives clear perspective on both sides. And also reflects the truth for each person. So it's amazing how you sit as a double-sided mirror between two sides. They're both looking at each other, but also looking at themselves. And I thought, mashallah, that's the sort of person that I see now that I never saw.
You've done the I am for me better than me. I mean, that's an incredibly kind thing to say.
Mashallah, Allah bless you.
I'm not sure it's true, but if it's as an aspiration, I think it's,
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you.
May Allah bless you and your family. We appreciate the opportunity.
And your time,
MashaAllah.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been my honor. And
thank you very much.
I look forward to part 2 next week.
No, there's no doubt we're going to have a part 2. Because we have to, look, the guys, I know you're watching. We need you guys to ask the questions for the next one. So what you need to do now is I want as many questions possible, and I promise you we're going to get him back to answer as many as you can. How about that?
Do you know what? I think this is the wrong approach. What you need to do is get my wife Susan to ask me the questions. Then you'll get some stuff.
My God. I think we're going to get Ahmed and Susan to come ask the right question.
That's it. I'm out. I can't do this.
Now we're going to get rid of it, mashallah. May Allah bless you. Jazakumullah khair. Please, guys, mashallah, as we noticed on the podcast, 95% of the people that are watching or listening haven't prescribed, and we'd love for you guys to prescribe to whatever channel you're watching, inshallah, because it does help the podcast grow. And inshallah, so that means we can do more for you and bring amazing brothers and sisters like Waleed on board again, so they can share their experiences and their beautiful stories to enlighten our brothers and sisters throughout the whole world. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.